Welcome to Redemption. My name is Casey Jordan, and it's an honor to be with you all. If you're here at Redemption for the very first time, I am confident that I am not the first person to welcome you, but let me go ahead and do that. Welcome to Redemption. We're so glad that you're here. Here at Redemption, we hope that every week you experience two things. The first is that when you come here, we hope that you experience the presence of God. Now, God is here every week, whether you are or not, but we hope that when you're here today, you encounter him, you experience his presence, you hear him speak. And then second of all, we hope that you encounter the nicest people in St. Louis. And they really are. Like, this is the nicest group of people in St. Louis. And again, if you're here for the first time, I'm confident you've already experienced that today. But our purpose here at Redemption, our whole reason for existence, is to help the people of Kirkwood and the surrounding areas come to meet, know, and live for Jesus. That is what we're all about here at Redemption. So again, it's an honor to be with you. I'm glad to be here. Last September, I was in Israel, and on that trip, I quickly became friends with a woman named Tammy and her husband, Chris. They sat behind me on the bus, and so over the course of about 10 or 12 days, we spent a lot of time together. I spent most of our rides turned around talking with Tammy, and on one of those rides, we got talking about gift giving. And Tammy was telling me what she does with her grandkids. She said that for her grandkids' birthday, they get to have a yes day, where they get to ask for anything that they want, any experience that they want, any unforgettable memory or moment that they want. And to the best of Tammy's ability, she will make it happen for them. So rather than a toy that they're going to play with for a little while and, end up on, shelf in a closet, forgotten, a couple months down the road, she gives them experiences. And I loved that idea. So I was asking her, I said, tell me like what your grandkids have asked for. So they know this is coming. They have weeks and even months to be thinking about what they want for their yes day. And she said that a handful of years ago, when one of her grandsons was turning 8, he was super into paper airplanes. And so for his birthday, he wanted to meet a famous paper airplane pilot. Okay, so paper airplane pilots are not really household names, right? I mean, can anyone name one? I would have been super impressed if you could. But Tammy, no challenge is off the table for Tammy. So Tammy sought out the world record holder for the longest paper airplane toss, tracked him down, contacted him, and set up a Zoom call with her grandson. So her grandson got to spend an hour talking to a famous paper airplane pilot. They spent an hour talking about paper airplane technique and strategy. It was one of the best days of this little 8-year-old's life. Her granddaughter, she did something similar for her with her favorite children's author. She tracked down the author and got a Zoom call set up for her granddaughter to get to ask about her favorite characters and the storylines. And so I asked Tammy, I said, of all of the requests, I think she's got 5 or 6 grandkids. I said, of all the requests you've gotten over the years, do you have a favorite? Like a favorite request you've gotten? And she said, yes. When my other grandson was turning 5, he said he wanted for his birthday, for his yes day, he wanted to milk a cow and eat an orange on the same day. That was his little 5-year-old request. And so Tammy, they live in Tulsa, and Tammy found a farm about an hour away, a family-run farm, that would agree to let her 5-year-old grandson come and milk a cow. So Tammy stopped at the grocery store, got an orange, and picked up her grandson, and they went to milk a cow. And I asked her, I said, I have to know, was it everything he hoped it would be? And she said, he loved his orange. He did not enjoy milking a cow as much as he thought that he would. But he got to milk a cow and eat an orange on the same day. And she's like, to me, that's one of the most unforgettable things that they have requested. And I absolutely loved that. So that night when we got back to our hotel somewhere in Israel, I kept thinking about that conversation with Tammy. Part of the reason is just because I love the experiences that she's providing for her grandkids. I love the memories that she's making for them. But second of all, I couldn't stop thinking about it because it prompted me to think about prayer. See, to Tammy's grandchildren, what they were asking was audacious. It was impossible. It was certainly beyond anything that they could have orchestrated themselves. They're too little. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have the knowledge. But to Tammy, none of this was impossible. She had to get creative on occasion, but none of it was impossible. This was all very possible, all within her ability. So far, to date, I texted her about this the other day just to make sure I was still correct. She said, to date, they have not asked for anything that I couldn't pull off. I've had to get creative, but I've been able to pull off every request. But they couldn't have pulled off any of those requests themselves. They were too little. And so it made me think about prayer, because for God, nothing is impossible. Nothing is beyond the reach of his abilities. But how often do we pray audacious prayers? How often do we ask God to intervene in a way that only he can, in a way that would be impossible for us, but is not impossible for him? How often do we pray like that? We're in a series right now on the book of Joshua, and today we're looking at one of the most audacious prayers prayed in the entire Bible. And so here at Redemption, we start in the same place in our Bibles every week, and that's the table of contents. So if you've got your physical Bibles or a digital Bible, you can turn to the table of contents. We're in the book of Joshua. Joshua is the 6th book of the Bible, so it's going to be nearish the front, and we're going to be in chapter 10. So while you're going there, let me give you a little bit of background. So the book of Joshua, as you know, if you've been here throughout this series, tells of the people of Israel entering into and then conquering this land that God had long ago promised to give to the descendants of Israel, the Israelites being those people, all right? So they're coming into this land. And so what I want you to see here on this map is that they enter in from the east, crossing the Jordan River, and pretty quickly conquer Jericho and Ai. Jericho and Ai were military fortress cities, all right? They come and they conquer. And so Gibeon would likely have been next. Gibeon would likely have been next. Gibeon was a stronger city than either Jericho or Ai, but they had seen God's intervention in those battles. And so the Gibeonites trick Israel into forming a treaty. We'll come back to that in a minute. But they trick Israel into forming a treaty because they know they're next on the list, and if we form an alliance, they won't attack us. So they trick Israel into this treaty and manage to escape their own destruction. So let's pick up the story there in Joshua 10. Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had captured and completely destroyed Ai and killed its king, just as he had destroyed the town of Jericho and killed its king. He also learned that the Gibeonites had made peace with Israel and were now their allies. He and his people became very afraid when they heard all this, because Gibeon was a large town, as large as the royal cities and larger than Ai. And the Gibeonite men were strong warriors. Okay, so Jerusalem lies just to the southeast of Gibeon. It was better known at this point, not as Jerusalem, but as Jebus. It was home of the Jebusites. So Jerusalem is not yet the capital of Israel. Israel has just entered the land. It's not yet the capital. It's not the Jerusalem we know today. It's an occupied territory, and it's occupied by the Jebusites. So now, Gibeon would have been next on Israel's conquer list, if you will. Now they're in an alliance with the Gibeonites. So who's next? Probably Jerusalem. Probably Jerusalem. So Adoni-Zedek is real scared. He's real concerned about this. Not only has he heard what the Lord has done, how he was at work in Jericho and Ai, but now Israel has partnered with one of the more powerful tribal peoples in the area. By the way, just a real fun aside, Adoni-Zedek in Hebrew means Lord of Righteousness, which is a little bit ironic given that he's about to go up against the capital L, Lord of Righteousness. So Adoni-Zedek had already heard what the Israelites did, or again, rather what God had done in Jericho and Ai, and he was unsettled at best. Now that he hears that the people of Israel have entered into a treaty with the most powerful people in the region, he's flat out terrified. He's terrified. So listen to what he does. So King Adoni-Zedek of Jerusalem sent messengers to several other kings, Hoham of Hebron, Piram of Jarmuth, Japhia of Lachish, and Deber of Eglon. Come and help me destroy Gibeon, he urged them, for they have made peace with Joshua and the people of Israel. So these 5 Amorite kings combined their armies for a united attack. They moved all their troops into place and attacked Gibeon. So Adoni-Zedek calls upon 4 other Amorite kings and employs them to come join forces in destroying the Gibeonites. Interesting. He's not brave enough to say, hey, come help me attack Israel. Notice he's not brave enough for that. Instead, he says, let's attack the Gibeonites. We see that they have a powerful God, the Israelites do. They have a powerful God, and we're not real sure about going up against them, but let's at least try to cripple them. Let's at least try to do away with their only ally. If we can put them at even a little bit of a disadvantage, maybe that will help us out when they come to attack us. And so this peace treaty isn't just bad news for Adoni-Zedek, even though he's probably next on their attack list. It's bad news for all of the tribal people in that region if Israel keeps moving through the land as they've been moving through the land. And so it makes complete sense that these 4 other kings would say, yep, we will join you. We're threatened by this too. We will come to your aid. We will team up. We will destroy the Gibeonites. We will do our best to, again, at least cripple Israel's advantage. So that's what they're attempting to do here. So let's keep reading. The men of Gibeon quickly sent messengers to Joshua at his camp in Gilgal. Don't abandon your servants now, they pleaded. Come at once. Save us. Help us. For all the Amorite kings who live in the hill country have joined forces to attack us. So Joshua and his entire army, including his best warriors, left Gilgal and set out for Gibeon. So the Gibeonites were a strong people, as we've already seen, but even they didn't love the odds of 5 kings against 1. They're not feeling great about this battle. So what do? They call upon their allies. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Gibeonites had tricked Israel into a treaty. If you go back 1 chapter, in chapter 9, which, by the way, I would recommend going and reading this week. It is a fascinating story on its own. But what they did was the Gibeonite people, again, you saw the map, you kind of know about where Gibeon is. They dressed themselves up. They came up with this elaborate ruse. They dressed themselves up so it looked like they had been traveling for days or even weeks. They're all dressed up and they're haggard looking. They come to Joshua and they say, we are here because we have heard about all the incredible things that the Lord your God has done, how he helped you to destroy the city of Jericho and the city of Ai. And so we've heard about this. We're from a far-off country. And we have just come seeking a treaty before you make your way to us. We're from a far-off country. And Joshua pushes back at one point. He says, are you sure? Like, are you not from among the Canaanite tribes that we have been sent here to destroy? And like, no, we're not from around here. We're from a far-off country, real far away. You've never even heard of us. And so Joshua enters into a treaty with the Gibeonites, believing their story, believing that they're from a far-off country. But it's really interesting. The text notably says that when it came to this elaborate ruse and this proposition of a treaty, it says the Israelites did not consult the Lord, but they entered into this alliance anyways. So here's the point. The Gibeonites are being attacked by 5 Amorite kings. This really has nothing to do with Israel, but now, because they are the Gibeonites' allies, it is their battle. In other words, they've gotten themselves into this mess. They're not supposed to be in this battle to begin with. Had they consulted the Lord would have told them, don't enter into a treaty with them. They're from among the Canaanite people. They're next door neighbors to Ai. They live right there. They're among the people that you've been sent here to conquer, not to bind to yourselves. God would have corrected them, but they didn't consult the Lord. They didn't seek out his wisdom. They didn't seek out his direction. So Joshua made this vow to the Gibeonites before the Lord and in the name of the Lord. And so Joshua is going to honor his vow. He's going to honor his vow. I love how one commentator put it. These friends of Israel had now become the burden of Israel. This must be exactly what Joshua had feared all along. The Gibeonites being perennially dependent upon Israel and having Joshua fight battles that were not his own. Yet he had no choice but to honor the terms of the treaty he had made. So he marched up from Gilgal with his entire army, including all the best fighting men, perhaps ready to pay for his own mistake. Have you ever made a decision and later thought, dadgum, I should have talked to God about that. Shoot, I should have asked for his wisdom. I should have asked for his direction. I should have asked for his guidance. If I had, maybe I wouldn't be in this mess. Anyone? I know I have. Thousands of times. We're going to get to Joshua's audacious prayer here in just a moment. But it strikes me that the reason that Joshua needed to pray an audacious prayer is because he failed to pray a rather ordinary one in the first place. God, what do you want me to do here? God, what is your next step for me? God, is this the direction you want me to go? He failed to pray a rather ordinary prayer. And I wonder how often we could trace back our audacious prayers back to a source, if you will. And that source being a failure to pray a rather ordinary, mundane, everyday prayer. I wonder. Now, Don't hear what I'm not saying. I understand that there are situations that are entirely out of our control, where we have done nothing to get ourselves into this situation, and it's hard, and we need God to intervene in a way that only he can. I understand that. So I'm not trying to be dismissive about those situations, but if I look back over my life, and if you're honest, if you look back over yours, I suspect we would come to a similar conclusion, that most of the time, when we end up in a mess, it's a self-inflicted mess. It's one that we caused for ourselves, and that maybe could have been avoided had we prayed ordinary, mundane, everyday prayers in the first place. So we can and should pray audacious prayers, but before we do, maybe let's look back, let's trace it back, and find out if we've been failing to pray ordinary prayers, and we're banking on audacious prayers to get us out of a prayerless lifestyle. All right, so what we do know is that Joshua didn't pray in ordinary prayer. He didn't consult the Lord. He didn't ask God to give him wisdom. And so here we are. This is the mess that they're in. So Israel, as we read, was camped out at Gilgal. Now, we don't know exactly where Gilgal was, but if you backtrack in Joshua a bit to chapter 4, we read that it was on the eastern border of Jericho. So if you look at this map, so there's Jericho. It's kind of in the valley just to the north of the Dead Sea. And they hike 15 miles uphill to Gibeon. So you see where Gibeon is? That's in the hills. That's in the mountains. Israel's down at Gilgal. 15 miles uphill, they trek through the night to get to Gibeon. Now, that's important for us to understand because they are coming into this battle physically exhausted. They're exhausted. Now, here's what I want you to see. God was under no obligation to fight on Israel's behalf. He wasn't. He did not get them into this mess. Now, he had promised to go with them into the land to help them conquer, but they were conquering up until this point at the direction of God. Hey, I want you to go to Jericho. I want you to go to Ai. God did not say, I want you to go to Gibeon. So up until this point, God has been leading the charge, if you will. This time, Israel's leading the charge. God is under no obligation to come through for the people of Israel. He's not. This is not part of the agreement. He had not prohibited them from entering into this treaty, but he had not prompted them to enter into this treaty. He had not prohibited them from going into battle, but they were not going into battle at God's behest. All right? We need to understand that. Instead, we see that God comes through in a way without obligation, under no obligation, but he comes through anyways. And this is what he says to Joshua. He says, as they're marching up to Gibeon from Gilgal, "Do not be afraid of them," the Lord said to Joshua, "for I have given you victory over them. Not a single one of them will be able to stand up to you." Now, a couple of things worth noticing here. First, even though God was under no obligation to promise Israel success, he very graciously assures them that they will be victorious. In fact, I love how he words it. He uses the past tense. I have given you victory. It's in the past. The battle hasn't happened, but it's in the past tense that God speaks. That is how sure I am, as if it's already happened. This victory is decided. The battle is won. So God makes that very clear, and it's incredibly gracious. But here's what we need to notice, is that this is a descriptive text, not a prescriptive one. Let me explain the difference. In the Bible, there are two types of texts. There are descriptive texts, and a descriptive text describes something that happened. A prescriptive text prescribes behavior, tells us what to do, or it tells us how God works, how God operates within the world. Now, this is important to understand this distinction, because if we read this text as a prescriptive one, we might conclude that it doesn't really matter what we do. God's going to come up behind and clean up our mess, right? We saw him do it in this story. If that's prescriptive, if this is the way that God always operates, well, then why pray at all? I don't need to pray for God's wisdom and direction. If I get myself into a mess, God will take care of it. Here's the problem. This is not a prescriptive text. This is a descriptive text. It is describing what God did in this instance. But it is God's prerogative to determine how, when, even if he will intervene. See, God is a good father. And like any good father, there are times where he will step in and protect his children from the consequences that their poor choices deserve. Sometimes he will. But also, like a good father, there are times where he will allow his children to experience the consequences of their poor choices. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of love. To teach them, to correct them, to mold and shape them. In fact, we've seen that on more than one occasion, God actually allows the people of Israel to experience defeat at the hands of their enemies. Always following, notice this, always following Israel's disobedience or distrust. So God doesn't always protect them from the consequences of their sin. Sometimes he does. Here he does. But he doesn't always. And so it would be a misinterpretation for us to take this passage and be like, see, this is how God always works. God's always going to come through. No matter how much I mess up, God's going to protect me from the consequences. That's not promise. This is a descriptive text, not a prescriptive one. So sometimes God does, but again, it is God's prerogative to determine what is best for us. And if his intervention is best, well, then that's what he'll do. If his allowing us to experience the consequences of our choices is best for us, then that's what he'll do. Always for our good. Always for our good. The book of Deuteronomy says this. Think about it. Just as a parent disciplines a child, the Lord your God disciplines you for your own good. For your own good. So guys, God is not into this whole gentle parenting thing. He's a God who disciplines for the good of his children. For the good of his children. Now, the second thing worth noting here is that while God has assured Israel of victory, Israel will still have to fight. They are going to participate in this battle. Here's what I want you to notice. They can't do it without God, but God won't do it without them. They can't do it without God, but God won't do it without them. He could do it without them, but he won't. They're still going to fight this battle. That's another misconception that I think we often have when it comes to prayer, is we think that once we've prayed, once we've handed it over to God, well, then our part's done. We have no further role to play. There's nothing for us to do. We're just going to let go and let God, if you will. But that's a misconception, because really what God invites us into is a partnership with him. Now, there are times throughout the Bible where God does intervene without any human involvement whatsoever. But that's not typical. That's not how God usually works. More often than not, he works in and through us in partnership. So, just as we could fail to pray in the first place, to ask for wisdom, to consult the Lord, and just assume that God is going to come up behind and clean up our mess, so also we can fail to ask God how he wants us to participate, what he wants us to do. So take a struggling marriage, for example. It is good and right and wise to pray for God to intervene in an otherwise hopeless situation, to do what only he can do. It is also good and right and wise to ask God, okay, what's my part here? How do you want me to love my spouse the way that you have loved me? Where do I need to forgive? Where do I need to seek forgiveness? God, what is it that you want me to do so that I can become the kind of spouse that you have called me to be? Where do you want me to take ownership? So ask God for his intervention, and then also ask God how he wants you to participate. How he wants you to participate. And you could apply that to just about any situation that you're going through, couldn't you? Through financial difficulties, through troubles at work, through parenting a wayward child, to just about anything at all. God, I'm asking you to intervene. I'm asking you to do what only you can do. I need you. I can't do this on my own. But I know that more often than not, you won't do this without me. So what do you want me to do? How am I supposed to participate here? How do you want me involved? Would you give me your wisdom? Would you give me your direction? Would you give me your guidance? Would you give me the strength and courage to do what you're telling me to do? That's a good prayer. God, will you intervene? How can I help? How can I help? All right, back to the Israelites. In verse 9 it says this. Joshua traveled all night from Gilgal and took the Amorite armies by surprise. The Lord threw them into panic, and the Israelites slaughtered great numbers of them at Gibeon. Then the Israelites chased the enemy along the road to Bet Horon, killing them along the way. Lost my spot there. Killing them all along the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As the Amorites retreated down the road from Bet Horon, the Lord destroyed them with a terrible hailstorm from heaven that continued until they reached Azekah. The hail killed more of the enemy than the Israelites killed with the sword. So Joshua and his army marched all night, 15 miles upward, remember? Doesn't that sound like, what your grandparents told you? Like, in my day, I would, walk to school 10 miles uphill both ways in the snow. It kind of sounds like that. That's really what they did. They climbed 15 miles uphill through mountainous terrain, didn't sleep, and immediately find themselves in battle. Okay, so I mentioned this, but I just want you to really have this in your minds. They're exhausted. Can you imagine fighting a battle after climbing 15 miles in mountainous terrain? Or 15 miles on flat terrain? They're exhausted. They're exhausted. They need God to come through. And so God, ever true to his promise, comes through. He starts by throwing the Amorites into panic, which just gives the Israelites a further advantage. But then God himself joins the fray. And I love this mental image. I love to use my imagination when I read the Bible and try to envision what this scene must have been like. He starts pelting them with hail. It says a hailstorm. I like the mental image, though, of God just like, thunking from, from where he's watching, just like, yep, got that one. That's how I like to imagine this hailstorm actually taking place. It's more fun when you read the Bible like that. Read the Bible with your imagination. It's a blast. So God joins the fray, and he kills more of the Amorites than the sword, than the whole army of Israel kills. And so again, proving that while he has invited Israel into a partnership, it is not an equal partnership. God is far and away the greater party in this partnership. So Israel is well on its way to the victory that God had promised, but they're not there yet. They're not there yet. And so now we come to Joshua's audacious prayer. So let's keep reading. On the day the Lord gave the Israelites victory over the Amorites, Joshua prayed to the Lord in front of all the people of Israel. He said, "Let the sun stand still over Gibeon and the moon over the valley of Ashalon." So the sun stood still and the moon stayed in place until the nation of Israel had defeated its enemies. Is this event not recorded in the book of Jashar? The sun stayed in the middle of the sky and it did not set as on a normal day. So Joshua prays for God to do what only he can do. He asks God to stop the rotation of the earth so that the Israelites could finish claiming the victory that God had promised. He's asking God to do what only God could do. This is a bold prayer. But it's not a baselessly bold prayer. It's rooted in the character of God. See, God had promised Israel victory, and God is a God who keeps his promises. So Joshua, this isn't just a wish. This isn't just something Joshua's hoping that God might want to do. No, he's praying based on who God is. You have made this promise that we will be victorious. You are a God who keeps your promises. And so on the basis of who you are, I am praying for the sun to stand still so that we can finish this battle, so that we can finish claiming the victory that you have assured us. Now, you might be asking yourself, and I'd understand if you were, isn't asking God to stop the rotation of the earth almost unreasonable by definition? Like, that's an unreasonable thing to ask. Well, that kind of depends. If we believe in a supernatural God who created the universe, as actually most Americans do, by the way, statistically speaking, then it's not at all unreasonable to believe that a God who created everything could intervene in his creation, could do the miraculous. It's not at all unreasonable. Uncommon, outside our abilities, but not at all unreasonable, not the least bit. Now, if you don't believe that, if you don't believe in a creator who created all that there is, well, that's another conversation for another time. But if you do, well, then this is not an unreasonable request. Again, an uncommon one, but not unreasonable. So it's audacious, but not unreasonable. This is an audacious prayer, not because Joshua prayed something that is impossible for God. It's an audacious prayer because Joshua prayed something that was impossible for him, for Joshua. And so he goes and asks God to do what only he can do. So bold prayers, audacious prayers, require humility. They require admitting that we have limits, that we're finite, that we can't do everything, that we can't solve everything, that we actually need God's intervention, that we actually need God's involvement in our lives. So bold prayers are childlike, if you will. Not childish, they're childlike. A couple of years ago, my now 2-year-old niece, Lila, was born. And her older sister, Kennedy, had been praying for a little sister. She had been praying for a little sister, and God generously blessed their family with this sweet, fiery, hysterical little girl that is now 2 and adorable. So the night that Lila came home from the hospital, I went over to meet her. And my whole family was there. All the adults were kind of in the kitchen talking, and I was sitting over on the couch with Kennedy, Lila's older sister, and my other niece, Annie, Kennedy's cousin. And so Annie at the time had 2 younger brothers, still has 2 younger brothers, just to be very clear. They're still there. They're still around. But Annie has 2 younger brothers, does not have a sister, and so she's holding Lila for the first time. And so I'm kind of the adult supervising, just making sure everything's okay. I mean, Lila's a couple days old. So Kennedy and Annie are sitting on the couch. Annie's holding Lila. I'm sitting kind of on the ottoman, just watching and listening. And Annie is being so sweet with this little girl. Annie loves babies, and she loves little girls. And so she's holding her brand new cousin, and she's like, oh, she is so cute. I'm so excited for you, Kennedy. She's just being so sweet. And she looks at Ken, and she goes, I would just love to have a little sister. And Kennedy, who is the most enthusiastic child that I have ever met, the most earnest child I've ever met, she gets so excited. She goes, Annie, guess what? If you pray to Jesus for a little sister, he'll give you one, because God loves to give good gifts. And I'm sitting there like, I'm the adult in the room at this moment, but I'm not a parent. This is a conversation for their parents. Because I loved Kennedy's heart, and I was like, oh, I believe that you can pray, and that God often does, answer our prayers, and God does bless. And so Annie took Kennedy at her word, and she started praying every night for a little sister, and praise the Lord, a little over a year later, we had Lainey. She ended up with a sweet little sister who is turning 1 this week on Thursday. And so God did answer that sweet prayer. Now here's what I want you to see. God hadn't promised to give Annie a sister. He hadn't. God wasn't under any obligation to answer that prayer. But Annie was praying this audacious prayer, still rooted in the character of God. God, you haven't promised this, but I do know that you are a God who loves to give good gifts to your children. And so I'm going to ask. I'm going to pray boldly. I'm going to pray audaciously. There's nothing that I can do to make this come about. Even my parents can't control whether it's a boy or girl if we're going to have another baby in this family. So God, I'm asking you to do what only you can do. Will you give me a little sister? And I love that. And I love that God answered. But here's the point. Children have no qualms about making bold requests before God. They don't. They don't. Their pride doesn't get in the way of asking. Their reason doesn't tell me, well, this is impossible. Why bother asking? It doesn't. They just ask, usually rather simply. So audacious prayers, bold prayers, they're childlike prayers. They're Annie-like prayers, Kennedy-like prayers. That's the prayer that Joshua prayed. It was this bold, audacious prayer rooted in who God is. We grown-ups, though, we tend to shy away from bold prayers. It could be that we don't want to admit that we need God's intervention, that we do have limits, that we can't control everything ourselves. It could be that. It could be that we don't really believe that God can or will intervene in a way that is impossible for us. We may say that we believe it, but let me ask you, if you say you believe it, don't you think you'd be praying more bold prayers? If you really believed it, that God could intervene, that God could do the impossible, don't you think that would impact the way that we pray? So it could be that we don't really believe it, if we're being honest with ourselves, even if we say that we do. It could be that prayer is just foreign to us. It's not something that we've done before. And so we're worried about getting it wrong, not saying the right words. But again, can I take you back to my now 9-year-old niece and her prayer? God, would you please give me a little sister? How complex is that? How eloquent is that? Just simple. It's just simple. So let me ask you this. What bold, audacious, impossible if it wasn't God prayer do you need to pray? Where do you need to let go of maybe your doubts, maybe your insecurities? Maybe you need to set aside your pride in order to ask. In order to ask. Let's wrap up the story. There's never been a day like this one, before or since, when the Lord answered such a prayer. Surely the Lord fought for Israel that day. God had promised to give the Israelites victory over the Amorites. I don't know how he intended to do that. I know that he intended to be good to his promise. I don't know how he intended to do it. But what we see him do is we see him take Joshua's request into account. It's almost as though Joshua's saying, here's how I want to do it. Could we? Can we do it this way? And God says yes. God listens to the battle strategy of Joshua and says, okay, I'm giving you this victory regardless. You want to do it this way? We'll do it that way. I love that. I love that. But here's the thing. Prayer in and of itself is not powerful. I know, not something you expect to hear in church. Prayer by itself is not powerful. The one prayed to is. The one prayed to is. So prayer alone does nothing at all if it's not directed at the right person. Prayer itself is not powerful. The one prayed to is. But listen to what the book of Ephesians tells us. Now all glory to God who is able, through his mighty power at work within us, to accomplish infinitely more than we might ask or think. If you want to pray audacious prayers, if you want to pray bold prayers, I would recommend maybe committing that verse to memory and recite it to yourself before you pray, just to remind yourself of who you're praying to, what he's able to do, how he's able to intervene, who can accomplish infinitely more than we might ask or think. And we experience this undeserved privilege of coming to God, being able to pray bold, audacious prayers because of Jesus. We should not have access to God. We shouldn't. Our sin has separated us from him. We should not have access to God. But Jesus on the cross made a way. He took the punishment that we deserve so that we could be brought back into a reconciled relationship with God, a partnership with God. And one of the benefits of that relationship is that we have unhindered access to God in prayer. In the simplest, most ordinary, most mundane prayers, and the boldest, most audacious, God, will you keep the earth from rotating prayers?